Welcome to What You Need to Know for Audio Engineers. This video we're talking about keyboards. We talked about guitars in the last video. Here we're talking about keyboard instruments. Let's start with some general keyboard stuff. So one of the kinds of keyboard instruments that we have on stage is the hardware instrument. And that's the first one right here, the hardware instrument. This is an instrument that has the sound built in to the instrument. Our current piano is one of these. It's the Roland FP30X, I believe, is the name of the instrument. And it's just got a piano sound, a really good piano sound built into the keyboard, comes with it. And you press the keys and it makes a good piano sound. And that's what a hardware instrument is. Then you can have something like a software instrument, which for a software instrument you will probably see a laptop on stage sitting on a stand next to the keyboard. You might see the keyboardist reaching over to the laptop and they're not checking their emails. They are manipulating their virtual instrument, which is hosted on that laptop. So what the keyboard instrument in front of them is doing is controlling through MIDI, which we'll get to in just a second. But the keyboard instrument that they're actually playing, it's a piano keyboard, but it's controlling through MIDI the software which is hosted on that laptop. And there's a number of different softwares that can do, any piano sound or keyboard sound or synthesizer sound that you want. Then we have combo instruments. So a combo instrument is a combination of hardware and software all in one. Let's say you have a digital piano that you really like the sound of, maybe like a really nice Nord stage piano. So you can take that really nice piano sound that comes in that $5,000 keyboard, take a line out of that, send it to a DI and off to the mix rack. There you've got your piano sound. But let's say you want to mix in the sound of a string orchestra or something like that. That you have a sample library of a string orchestra on your laptop, so you connect the MIDI from the keyboard to the computer, and now you've got two instruments in one. So you play all the same notes, and the orchestra and the piano are creating the same notes at the same time. So hopefully that explains really well the difference between hardware, software, and combo instruments. Next up, digital versus analog, and it's pretty easy to explain digital versus analog, just like guitar stuff. Digital stuff is usually cheaper or relatively cheaper. Sometimes it's really expensive digital stuff out there if it's really nice and really well made. But digital stuff is usually more versatile. So a digital synthesizer might have the capability to create any kind of sound wave or a custom sound wave. And maybe it can mix 100 different sound waves on top of each other. From 100 different digital oscillators to create this huge, massive synthesizer sound. And an analog synthesizer is simply just not going to have that capability. It might have 4 oscillators on it, and those 4 oscillators have 4 different sound waves that they can choose from. So it's very limited, the analog side of things, but a lot of people really prefer the analog sound to the digital sound, though the digital sound is extremely versatile and extremely powerful nowadays, especially with modern technology. Next, we want to talk about MIDI. So MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface, and it's a language, basically, that computers know how to speak, and that people don't. So this language is used to communicate between a digital controller and a digital software of some sort. Press a button and send a number of different commands to the computer. That's all a MIDI controller does, is it communicates to software. Lastly, the processing that a keyboard instrument will go through, it's all the same as what a guitar might go through. We have effects, modulation, delay, reverb, maybe some distortion, maybe some compression, any number of effects that you can apply to any instrument, piano or guitar on stage. And a lot of the effects that are commonly used as guitar effects actually sound really good on like a synthesizer to make like a big stereo sound. Um, Speaking of stereo, we also can have mono, stereo, wet, dry, wet, any number of routing options available for keyboard instruments as well, just like the guitar. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the piano. When we're talking about piano, we mean that we hit the keyboard and a piano sound comes out of it. And that's what piano means when we talk about piano. So usually we're going to go for a digital piano. It's just the easiest, most economical, most practical, cheapest way to get a piano sound in a worship band is to use some sort of digital keyboard instrument. Acoustic pianos are more trouble than they're worth. It's just a line out to a DI to the mix rack. That's it. So digital is what we go for on in our church anyway, and I know a lot of churches do use acoustic pianos, but those are very different kinds of churches than ours is. So that's all there is to it. Upright versus grand pianos. Now, the upright piano sounds much looser, flabbier, and the actual note that those keys are meant to be producing is much more vague and loose. It's a much less accurate sound than a grand piano, and that's just because of how grand and upright pianos are in the real world. So if you were going to choose between the two, it depends on what the song is or what the piano player prefers. Both sound just fine. But if your piano player is going to be playing a lot of really low bass notes with octaves or something like that with their left hand, then you probably want to suggest that they use a grand piano model or a grand piano sample for their digital piano. We can also, in a lot of different kinds of instruments, and especially in the software instruments, we can have mixed sounds in our pianos. So we can take a piano and we can mix it with an orchestra. We can mix it with a brass ensemble. We can mix it with a choir. We can mix it with a synth, a pad, with lots of reverb and delay and effects and modulation and things on it. That's another great option, especially if there's only one piano player on stage. If they're using a software instrument on stage and that instrument can do some mixed sounds and they're the only piano player on stage, you probably want to have a piano sound, but you also probably want to have some pads built in as well. So you can talk to that musician and say, hey, can you go for a mixed sound? Can you do like a dark pad underneath your piano sound? We generally want them to be mixed in stereo, so left and right, and that's just to add to the natural kind of sound of the piano. And effects. Reverb is generally the craziest effect that you're going to put on a piano. Delays and things like that are probably going to cause problems for your musician. They're not used to playing with a delay on, more than likely. But that's just down to the individual musician. They can add whatever effects they want to their instrument, and you can add whatever effects you want to as well. If it sounds good and if it feels right and if it works really well for the mix. Okay, with the synthesizer, there are a number of different options that are possible. Depending on whether it's an analog or digital synthesizer on stage, it's probably going to be a digital software instrument with a laptop and all that stuff. But there are many, nearly infinite sound possibilities that can come from an instrument like that. So one of those being an electric piano sound like a Rhodes or a Wurlitzer. We can also have a pad. A pad sound is a sound that is darker in the EQ of it, so it's not going to have a whole lot of high frequency detail in it. But it's going to be very kind of mellow and, moody kind of sound in stereo, more likely than anything. But the purpose of a pad is usually to play chords and to play very slowly. It's a great option for underscoring a speaker or a prayer or something like that because it's very subdued. It takes up a lot of space but doesn't kind of call attention to itself. The pad is very passive and very kind of a background kind of sound. Then we have a lead sound, and a lead sound is, kind of the opposite of a pad sound. The way that you play a lead sound is to play a melody, like the hook of a song. So two very different kinds of sounds, and there's lots of variety in how a pad can sound and how a lead can sound. But there are two different kinds of sounds. One is bright and slow. One is dark and slow, the pad, and the other is bright and melodic, and that's the lead. Two different kinds of sounds that serve two different kinds of purposes in a mix and in any given song. Last, a very common usage for a synthesizer instrument on stage, strings and brass instruments, especially a software one, but you can have an analog synth string sound or synth brass sound as well. Okay, so there's a quick introduction to keyboard instruments. Hopefully you've got a good idea of how keyboard instruments work, how to communicate with them, and how to work with them to get different parts for different songs.